Hello and welcome to Space Engineers. This is Ashburner X, and I'm going to give a quick tutorial on how to use pistons and rotors. Now, the first thing you want to know about using rotors is, before you do anything with a rotor, you want to make sure that it is set to off. That is because when you have it set to do other things... Hold on, I'm adjusting the speed here. That is because if you don't have it off, what can happen when you adjust the values is it can eat the platform it's on. And you don't want it to eat the platform it's on until you're ready to do things. If that's what you designed it to do. Alright. Now, the first thing you need to do when you're working with a rotor is placement. You want to set it so that whatever you're radiating out of it, in this case I have a blast door, is set to 0. Because that makes it really easy to do the calculations for the rotor later on. Now what we want this rotor to do is we want it to go from 0 to 180 over here so the door opens. But we don't want it to go clockwise, because if it goes clockwise it's going to eat this platform. So instead of inputting a positive value for this, we're going to be working with negative values. Remember that. Positive values from the origin will make it turn clockwise. Negative values from the origins will make it turn counterclockwise. This is very important. Now let's look at the rotor itself. What you have here are a bunch of values that obviously you're not going to care about. Now the torque, like it says here, it determines how fast it will accelerate. Braking torque determines how fast it will stop. The velocity determines how fast it opens and closes. In this case, we're going to set it for about 1 RPM, so the door won't open too fast. Now, if you set it for a positive number, it's going to turn clockwise. If you set it for a negative number, it's going to turn counterclockwise. It's the same as working with the lower limits. Now, as I said before, we want 0 to be the origin point. And because we're making it work in counterclockwise, we need to use negative values. So, in this case, we're setting the upper limit for 0. That means it will not go clockwise more than 0 degrees. And then we set the lower limit, so it won't go counterclockwise more than 180 degrees. And down here we have rotor displacement. Rotor displacement is important for setting up alignment issues with things. For instance, if this thing was, if you're trying to keep this thing from going flush with the floor or whatever, like if it was sticking out too much, we could increase or decrease the alignment of the rotor to make it jut in and out a bit more. Now to show how this thing actually works, as I said before, I have it set for a velocity of 98 degrees. This makes it easy, so we don't need to mess around with a lot of stuff. I have it set up here with this button panel. The button panel lets you just set up things so you can press the button and it'll turn. In this case, I have it set to reverse with this thing. So when I hit this button here, it opens and closes the door. Very easy to use. You can make this do anything that it's connected to. So if I had, rocket turrets or whatever on here, I can turn them on and off or whatever. So, and that's how you use a rotor to make an opening and closing door. Now over here, I'm using 2 rotors for this crane I built. It's the same idea here, except on this lower one, I didn't set any values at all for anything because I wanted to be able to turn 360 degrees as best as I can. And on this one over here, I set it so that it can only go up to a maximum of 90 degrees because I want it to be able to go up, and then a negative 15 degrees because I don't want it to go all the way down and eat the platform. So let me go ahead and show off that. See, it turns and it counters. Now, you notice how it moved itself back to neutral? That's because I have connectors here. And these connectors help it feed parts into the grinder, or actually feed parts out of the grinder into the system of the actual ship. What it would do is if the grinder starts getting too full, Because what happens when I use the grinder is it's putting parts into here, then I can transfer the parts from here through the piston into the storage block, into the connector, and then into the connector here. So whenever I need to move stuff from one end to the other, I just park it, and that locks up the rotor, which is also good for, you know, parking it, so you don't want it to move around. And then now it's part of the system. Now let's show how rotors work, pistons work specifically. Now as you can see here, this is the default setting. This is the default setting for a piston. I have not adjusted these values at all except for the name. It starts with a default velocity of negative 0.5 meters a second. Excuse me, I need some little water there. This means that it is constantly pulling itself into itself to keep it closed. You can also adjust the maximal and the minimal distance. So, like, if you didn't want this thing to go the full 10 meters, you can set it to go, you know, 5 meters or whatever. Or if you didn't want it to close all the way, you can make it so that it closes at 5 meters instead of closing at 0 meters. Now let's show off how the toolbars work. When you go into your cockpit with T, what you do is you hit G, and it brings you to a thing like the building block menu. And it shows you all the blocks you have connected to that various ship. In this case, I have rotors for left and right, up and down. So I've set things for increased velocity and decreased velocity for these things, so I can adjust how they go up and down, and left and right. I also have a keyboard thing for making the piston pull in and out via reverse, and also turning the block on and off. If you turn a piston on and off, it freezes into place. So if you reach the distance you want it to be at that current time, you can just turn it off, and that's where it'll stand. I also have connected the grinder, because that's how it's going to grind. So I can use this thing to go left, right, up, down. Actually pointing a bit too much up. And it goes back to default because it's connecting. So let's turn on the piston itself. It moves pretty slowly because I don't have it set to go very fast, but you can increase and decrease that via the console as well. So when that reaches as far as I want it to reach, I will turn it off and it will freeze into place. And then I can turn on the grinder to heat up the target I built. And that's just a very quick rundown of how pistons and rotors work. However, it's important to mention that you really can't use these on highly populated multiplayer servers. This is because the way the server calculates each ship. What will happen is if you're on a very laggy, or not even a very laggy, but heavily populated server, the pistons will tend to snap off at this end and this end of the rotor. That is because these count, each half of the rotor and the pistons count as separate ships. So they'll break off on the slightest thing. So always remember that if you're going to do anything on a multiplayer server. If you only have like 4 guys on, and it's a pretty smooth running server, then you'll be fine. But if you have like 15, 20 guys, it could be a problem. So remember the population of the server before you do anything with rotors and pistons. Hopefully they'll fix this eventually, but right now that's how it works. Anyways, that's the defaults. I mean, that's all the important beginning information you need to know on how to use rotors and pistons. This is Ashburner X, and hope you guys enjoy Space Engineers.